Hello and welcome to the program. You with the Rise News in Nigeria's capital Abuja. Ahead over the next 60 minutes, all of the global headlines you need to know about. I'm Sulaiman Ahmed and you're watching the Rise News Hour. The big stories now. Nigeria's opposition parties say they'll keep fighting Bola Tinubu's victory. It comes after a tribunal rejected challenges by Atiku Abubakar and Peter Obi to cancel the election alleging irregularities. We have an assessment. Gabon's military leaders say they freed deposed President Ali Bongo from house arrest, where he's been since they ceased power last week. He's now granted permission to travel abroad for medical checkups. Growing pressure from the British government to brand Iran's Revolutionary Guard a terror organization. We have a special report from London. 2 of Donald Trump's 18 co-defendants in the Georgia election meddling case will be tried in October. A judge rejects a motion to have their cases heard separately. The former president and the other defendants will know next week if they will be tried at the same time. We're live in the US. We begin this news hour here in Nigeria, where the country's appeal court has rejected challenges to Bola Tinubu's narrow victory in February's presidential election. After an almost 10-hour verdict, judges said the petitions by his 2 main challengers were without merit. Both Atiku Abubakar of the People's Democratic Party and Peter Obi of the Labour Party had alleged widespread fraud. A presidential spokesman said President Tinubu welcomed the judgment, but the Labour Party and the PDP have both rejected the ruling, saying they're going to take the case to the Supreme Court.
I refuse to accept the judgment because I believe that it is bereft of substantial justice. However, the disappointment in the verdict of the court can never destroy my confidence in the judiciary. Consequently, I have asked my lawyers to activate my constitutionally guaranteed rights of appeal to the higher court, which in the instance is the Supreme Court of Nigeria. It is my conviction that the electoral process in Nigeria should be devoid of untidy manipulations, and that the outcome of every election should be a perfect reflection.
From on all of this, let's bring in Arise political editor and director of news, Sumner, Sambo, who joins me now live in the studio. Good to see you, and thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
You followed this till the very end yesterday, but again, some lawyers have started talking about the principles of presumption of regularity of elections, and that substantial conformity make it extremely difficult for parties, as it were, to make their cases in court.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very dicey situation for all of us, because when the justices say that there's a substantial compliance, to the electoral law, then of course it becomes a question of trying to understand the electoral jurisprudence that we have in the country as to what actually amounts to a substantial compliance to the Electoral Act. And then, of course, you would have also heard some of the parties involved, like the Labour Party, say that when political parties are involved, are not allowed by the institutions within the electoral cycle to be able to access documents and other things to beef up their petition, it could actually affect the sort of electoral jurisprudence that you have. And if the parties are not satisfied with the sort of outcome, there may be a resort to self-help. That is not what our democracy should be all about at this time. And we must ask those lawyers to actually be cautious in their choice of words. But of course, do they have a case? They actually have a case, because this is not the end. We still have the last layer, which is the Supreme Court. And that's why you would have heard the PDP saying, and its presidential candidate saying that, look, the judgment is bereft of substantial justice. And so the Supreme Court is the last hope of any challenges we have in our justice system. And so it's good to know that both of them have said that they are approaching the Supreme Court. Peter Obi of the Labour Party, not quite long, just said it right now, that look, the institutions of state are there for the purpose of justice, but there's a difference between judgment and justice. As far as he's concerned, he's going to the highest court of justice to seek justice. So we await to see what indeed the Supreme Court will say. But if you look at the precedent, judicial precedents. Yes. Does the Supreme Court do much when such cases get to it? Not necessarily, because the Supreme Court only reviews to a certain extent the things that were done by the appellate court. So there's a lot to be done and a lot to be learned. But if it is this same country where we've had judicial precedents on electoral matters over time, even with the narrow margin of the justices in the case between Yar'Adua and Buhari in 2007, where we had 3 on one side and then 4 on one side in the Supreme Court of 7 justices. I'll tell you that without us having some sort of, if you may call, dissident justices giving minority views in this election, when it gets to Supreme Court, I wonder how much more justice could be gotten.
You know, Sumner, you're not the only one speaking. A notable Nigerian lawyer, senior advocate of Nigeria, Ebwa Oluwadegborowa, has been speaking, and he specifically says, the verdict is a sober reflection, and he points to the fact that without first unbundling INEC to make it more independent, non-partisan and effective, anyone declared winner will most often coast to victory in the election tribunal.
Yes, it's time for institutional reforms, real institutional reforms, because when leaders actually say this is the road they are going to follow, the masses are expected to follow. So when you have leaders in the capacity of INEC chairman, for example, saying that we are going to do this and do that, and when he decides not to do that, he doesn't reverse his comment, and people go into an election with the notion that what he said earlier still stands, then of course people have a right to disagree with, you know, this sort of just judgments that we are hearing. And people have this right to actually express their views because the election court is telling us here that INEC used its discretionary powers, for example, to resort back to manual systems of tabulation because the IRF had issues here and there. But were the people fully aware that INEC had gone back? Why were the people still made to believe that, for example, we were still doing electronic transmission of election results? Yes, it's within INEC powers, but the people ought to have known. And so these are the sort of reforms that we expect from the leadership of the Electoral Commission to the judgments of the courts, without prejudice to what the Supreme Court is going to say. There's a need for leaders to match whatever they say. And one very good thing I'm happy about is that the 2 gentlemen petitioners, apart from APM, because we don't know what they have said, have agreed to approach the highest court of the land, telling all their supporters to calm down, look, don't embark on anything that may cause a breakdown of law and order. And then, of course, the councils have accepted that they are going to court to get justice. I feel very happy because in other climes, people would have resorted to the streets. And of course, that will have an effect. But let's look at the reforms. Even in the justice sector, how could the justices of the Court of Appeal have been delivering a judgment for 12 hours? This is a judicial precedent that we've never had before. What were they trying to justify? How come they couldn't give us the highlights of the judgment and then the lawyers will take care of the rest? So does it mean that our judicial system is still archaic? That's on the part of the judiciary. And then on the part of Nigerians, the electorate, we have to understand the role of political parties and their supporters as we go into the next election cycle. And then we have to understand the place of the reforms that we need. Why should a presidential candidate be sworn in before the cases are decided? Let's go back to Justice Uwe's report that was set up in 2009 and submitted his report. Why don't we have all the cases decided before the president-elect is sworn in? So these are some of the cases that eventually, if we're able to organize our systems, like Peter Obi has said, it could help us with a better electoral jurisprudence that will be acceptable, because there's difference between judgment and justice, like Peter Obi said.
Well, Sumner Sambo, many thanks for expatiating these for us.